Albedo is when material is completely light or completely dark. In the real world, we don't have materials that are 100% white. So the curtains in the reference are slightly translucent. So we need to imitate this translucency effect. So this is where translucency setting comes in handy. So now we need to set up reflections. Here the floor material appears to be lighter because it gives reflections. So we go to material setup and reduce roughness to 0.2. Hi everyone, welcome to Render.courses, and we're continuing to work on this interior. In this lesson we're going to assign materials in Corona. Now if you're using V-Ray, you need to watch the next video in which I'm showing you how to do the same in V-Ray. But in this lesson we'll be working in Corona solely. So I saved this scene precisely for Corona. We'll have two scenes, one for Corona and one for V-Ray. And we have this clay material render and this reference whose materials we need to recreate. All right, so let's go ahead and start. So here are some of the basic materials. So what we have is we have white walls, we have baseboard, we have some dark wood as well, some metal on the lamp, and probably the same metal on the window frames. This might be two different metals, but I don't see much difference, at least now. Okay, then we have chairs, we have a wooden table, and a rug. It's not too many materials, but this video is gonna be pretty long. Let's get started without further ado. Let's start with the walls. We open Material Editor and create Corona Physical MTL. To avoid confusion, let's rename it to Walls right away. And then we open Preview window so that we can use this ball as a reference. Let's put it here. The walls are white. We need to consider such thing as albedo. Albedo is when material is completely light or completely dark. In the real world, we don't have materials that are 100% white. And Corona is very sensitive to albedo, so when setting up a white material, refrain from using its whitest shade. Now, let's pick a color and set its value to well, let's say to 220. No, actually, let's make it 210. Don't set the value to the maximum though. This is what albedo is about. If we set our white material to the maximum, our render will slow down dramatically. Now, another setting is called roughness. It characterizes the reflecting power of a particular material, its glossiness. Since we're using white paint, we can just ignore this parameter. And in this lesson, we won't be able to cover all aspects of material setup. If you're willing to take a deep dive into material setup and architectural visualization, be sure to sign up for our Render courses. Hundreds of students have already completed our program and learned to create these beautiful, realistic renderings. So be next to join our training course. All right, so in this scene, we're using a simple white material. Plain simple. So next we select the walls and the ceiling and click Assign Materials, Assign Material to Selection. And nothing happened yet because we have MTL override switched on. So let's uncheck this box in Render Setup. We won't need it for now. So right now our walls are just white, and we might make their color more complex later if we need to. So for now, let's do the metal. So both the lamp and the window frames have metal parts. So let's create a new material and just drag Corona Physical MTL here and rename it to metal. So next we click Metalness and select metal from the list. Let's assign this material to the lamp and also onto the frame. Keeping Ctrl pressed, we select these two objects and click Assign Material to Selection. Objects turn gray. Let's select this region so that the interactive render is only working in this area. And now we're going to set up these materials, going from simple to more complex ones. Let's take a look at the references. So here's our reference. The metal parts here are very dark, but as I've said earlier, we shouldn't use the darkest shade. So let's set value to 5. See, material is no longer too dark. So next we need to add some glare, just like in the reference. For glare, we need to adjust the roughness. Let's set it to 0 and see what it will do to our material. So it has become glossy and we don't need this polished effect. So if you remember in the previous lesson, I was saying that the background would be reflected in various objects. So you can see that now it's reflected in the lamp. All right, so let's start to increase roughness to achieve the same effect as in the reference. Let's make it 0.3 and compare against the reference. Let's increase it some more, probably to 0.4. That will do just fine, I think. Yep. Okay, now our frame and lamp have this beautiful glare. So let's paint the curtains as well. So we'll go ahead and select them and assign. Okay, now let's move on to more complex materials. But first let's paint the vases and the pictures, because judging by the reference, they use pretty basic materials. This here is some kind of wood, but it looks like single color plastic. The vase is made of ceramics and has the same dark shade as the lamp. So I think we'll use another material for it. Okay, let's start with vases. Select the region and drag Corona Physical MTL here. Name it vase. You don't have to rename it. We do it just to avoid confusion. It's not metal, it's ceramics. So we change the setting to non-metal. Next we pick a dark color and set its value to 6. Assign it to vase. We have a roughness value here, but let's reduce it to something like 0.03. The material got glares, looks pretty much like in the reference. Anyway, we can always correct the color later if we need to. Okay, so now let's move to pictures. The picture is made of a passport too, frame and picture itself. And we need to assign 3 different materials. Corona physical MTL for the picture. Now the color. Let's go for a mix of brown and beige. Let's add more red to make it warmer. And now we assign it to the frames. Let's set roughness to 0.1 to make the frames more glossy. And now let's create a basic white plastic material for the Passport 2. It's plastic, hence non-metal. We set its value to 200 or 210. Set roughness to 0.1 to make Passport 2 glossy. And now assign it to the baseboard and Passport 2. Using one and the same material for 2 different objects as a kind of a simplification, but it doesn't make any difference here. Now the picture itself. So we drag Corona physical MTL and let's call it picture 2. I haven't found images that would fully match the reference. I found this texture. By the way, you can find all the textures used in this video under the link in the description. So what we have is this image that looks somewhat like our reference pictures. It has a 2 picture layout, and we drag it to material editor and link it to base color. Next, we can assign this material to one of the pictures. Our texture fits picture perfectly. But since we only need one half, we're gonna apply UVW map modifier to this object. Select planar here. Let's double the width from, that means from 800 to 1600. So now we need to move this gizmo, and let's select it and shift it along the Y so that now our texture fits into place. Okay, next we need to assign this the material to the other picture. So we select the picture and click assign. Then we select the previous picture, take its UVW map and drag it here. Now we need to shift gizmo. Select the gizmo, do a right click on the shift and move tool and shift it along Y. Okay, now we have 2 pictures, although we've used one and the same material. All right, now it's time to make our scene more detailed. Next on our list is the rug. It's all done the same way. Create a new Corona physical MTL, rename it to rug. And I've prepared some rug texture in advance. Here it is. It's available. You can find it in the description. So we drag it to material editor and link it to base color. And next we assign it to the rug. Done. Okay, let's compare it against the reference. Because of a different texture, our rug looks a bit different. It has horizontal stripes. So let's rotate stripes by rotating the texture. Double click on bitmap, set the angle along W axis to 90 degrees. Stripes have changed direction. Now let's make the rug a little more realistic. So all this rug fluff is a texture, but if we want to add more small details, we can create a displacement. Assign this texture to the displace slot. We use displace to extrude the texture in order to add micro relief. For the displacement to work correctly, we need to set it up. We do a double click on material, and here we have a parameter called displacement. The minimum level is at 0 millimeters. Maximum level is 1 millimeter. So this means displacement is currently at 1 millimeter. Let's change the maximum level to 3 and minimum level to -1. So the difference between minimum and maximum values is now 4. This means the relief of these small elements is 4 millimeters. And that will give a more realistic look to our rug. Okay, next let's work with the curtains. The curtain fabric and the chair fabric are slightly different. I'll explain to you later how they're different. So let's start with the curtains. We pick Corona Physical MTL, and we've already prepared the texture. So I drag it to Material Editor, link it to base color, and assign material to our curtains. All right, so what have we got here? Curtains now have a texture, although they look different to the reference. So the curtains in the reference are slightly translucent. So we need to imitate this translucency effect. So this is where translucency setting comes in handy. As you can see, it's now unavailable. And in order to activate it, we need to make our material thin, one-sided. So check thin shell, and then we need to set up translucency. We drag our texture right to this slot, translucency, as an instance copy. Okay, next we need to set up fraction parameter. Characterizes translucency. Let's change it to 0.1. Looks different, but it's not quite what we need. Let's increase it to 0.5. Curtains have become way too much translucent, so let's reduce fraction to 0.05. We're gonna do this until our curtains are slightly translucent, but not too shiny. So let's increase it to 0.3. Now the curtains are too light. Let's remove bitmap texture and just pick a color. We can make it lighter or darker. Fraction allows us to set up translucency of our texture. Right, here I can see that this part is translucent and this part is darker. That'll work. Now let's see how the entire curtains look. All right, next we need to set up a chair fabric. We're gonna use the same texture, but not translucent because we don't need this effect here. So let's assign texture to one chair and then copy it. Let's remove this chair and let's just concentrate on this one for now. This object is grouped. We open the group and select the seat. Now we create new material. And with Shift pressed, we can just copy the previous texture and link it to base color. So we assign the material to the seat. Looks pretty good. UVW map coordinates correspond to the object. So let's compare it to the reference. And it's okay that the reference image is more contrasting than the render. We'll adjust contrast later. This basic material will do just fine, I think. So next on our to-do list is wood. We have wood on the floor, on the chairs, and on the table. Let's start with the table. So let's examine different methods for creating this material and then move on to the chairs. Just like before, we create Corona Physical MTL, and I've prepared a wooden texture in advance. So we drag it to Material Editor, link it to base color, and assign it to our table. And now let's focus on the mapping. In the reference image, mapping is vertical, so this means we need to rotate this texture by 90 degrees. So we go to bitmap settings, rotate it 90 degrees, and here's our texture. Now let's move on to glare. If you take a closer look at the reference, you will see that some areas here are glossy, while others are matte. And this creates a relief effect and produces an interesting play of reflections. So let's try to imitate this effect. I found this texture. It's the same wood as in the reference, only black and white. So we drag it to Material Editor, and now we need to set up roughness. But first, let's add glossiness to the wood. We do double click on the material and set roughness to 0. And we see that material has turned completely glossy. As you can see, this parameter allows us to adjust glossiness. But if we want to make the material look more detailed and make some of its areas glossy and others, on the contrary, matte, we should use our black and white texture. We'll link it to this base roughness slot, and we see that some areas are now glossy and others matte. So next, we rotate texture by 90 degrees so that the glossiness match the diffuse map texture. And if you don't like this effect, if you want to obtain a more glossy or matte surface, you can feel free to edit this texture. So we do a double click on bitmap, go to output, and here we have this curve. Let's check enable color map. Now look, if we lower this curve, the table becomes more glossy. If we move it higher, it becomes more matte. Or we can add a Bezier point and continue to change this parameter. So we can bend the curve like this so that only small elements are glossy. Let's make the glossiness less pronounced. I think this will work. Okay, so the texture in the reference image is more homogeneous. It has fewer lines. So let's reduce the effect of this texture on the roughness. We double click the material. Here at the bottom we find this parameter, base roughness. It's currently at 100%. Let's change it to, let's say, to 80 or 70 or 60. This way, the texture will have a lesser effect on the roughness. The roughness will be mainly determined by the roughness parameter. Roughness is currently at 1. By balancing these two parameters, roughness and base roughness, we can achieve the effect like in the reference, a similar look. Okay, now we're gonna create a material for the chairs. The chair has no smoothing groups, so let's apply Turbo Smooth modifier. We click Turbo Smooth. There we go. And now we need to create the material exactly the same way. Let's rename this one to Wood Table. And this one to Wood Chair. This material is almost black. Let's change its value to 6. And now we need to assign it to the back. Let's scale down the region a little bit. And now let's adjust glossiness. In the reference image, we can see that the veiny areas are glossy, while other areas are not. So we need to reproduce the same effect. Let's start with setting roughness to 0. The wood has turned glossy, and now we need to assign a texture. So we can use the same texture we used for the table. So keeping shift pressed, we drag texture here and link it to base roughness. See? The veins have come up, only that they're vertical. We need to rotate texture and change this parameter to 0. The veins change direction to horizontal, and I think it looks pretty good. Theoretically, we could work with this material a bit more, but I think we've added enough details already, so let's just stop interactive render and copy these chairs, set them around the table. Select the group and close it. On top view, we use the mirror tool to create an instance copy of this chair along the Y. We put this chair here, and then keeping shift pressed, we use rotation tool to rotate it by 90 degrees. Next, we create an instance copy of the chair and place it here. With shift pressed, we add another copy. Next, we use mirror to copy these two chairs, but this time along the X axis. Put them here. And this is how our chairs are arranged around the table. All right. And so lastly, we need to assign material to the floor and put a bouquet into the vase. Okay, let's start with the floor. I can't see any boards, so let's just make it solid, just like in the reference. Also, let's adjust curtains a little bit so that they reach all the way to the floor. Select these lower points, enable soft selection, increase fall off parameter, and stretch the curtain all the way to the floor. Okay, good. for the floor, we're gonna use the same texture, like the one we used for the table. We're gonna make it a bit darker. So let's create Corona Physical MTL with Shift pressed. We drag the table texture here and link it to base color. Then we assign material to the floor. And next we need to reduce UVW map to make the texture finer. Apply UVW map to the floor and scale down our gizmo like this. The floor in the reference is darker, so we need to make our texture darker as well. In order to do this, we need to adjust output amount. So let's reduce it to 0.5. And now let's start interactive render and see what kind of result we got. Floors turned grayish. I don't like that. Let's use another map. It's called color correction. Let's reset output amount back to 1. And then we click maps, general color correction. And we add it between the bitmap texture and our material. Output amount as add 1. Okay. And now we need to reduce gamma. Switch to advanced mode and set gamma contrast to 0.5. The material is turned darker. Let's take a look at the interactive render. Yes, it is darker. So now we need to set up reflections. Here the floor material appears to be lighter because it gives reflections. So we go to material setup and reduce roughness to 0.2. And now there's more glossiness and it makes it look good. Alright, now we need to add a bouquet, and I prepared it beforehand. It's available under the link in the description. We head over to File, Import, Merge. Select Decor file, then select our object, then click OK. And now we just need to put it in the vase. On top or front view, we place it inside the vase. We can make it a bit bigger. The vase in the reference has a more narrow neck, so theoretically we could correct that, but here branches are rather wide and we don't want them to overlap with the neck, so let's leave it as it is. Now let's check our interactive render. Okay, so this is our bouquet. So then we can actually put the flowers deeper in the vase. If the branches overlap with the neck, we can use soft selection tool. switch to point selection, select this area where the points overlap, enable soft selection, and increase the fall off parameter. Then we scale down the points like this. Alright, so it looks like we're done with our materials. In the upcoming lessons, we're gonna do color correction and render the scene. If you're using V-Ray, the next video is for you. In that video, we'll be doing the same thing in V-Ray. So go ahead and subscribe to our channel, join our all-inclusive course, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Goodbye.